It's September 11th, 1917. Somewhere over the gray skies of northern France, a fighter plane cuts through the clouds. The pilot is 22 years old. His name is Georges Guynemer, and he's about to vanish without a trace. This isn't a crash landing where wreckage scatters across a field. This isn't a bailout where a parachute deploys and a pilot walks away. This is something far more mysterious, something that would haunt aviation history for over a century. Guynemer had already shot down 53 enemy aircraft. 53! Think about that number. He'd become a legend, the Knight of the Air, France called him. Pilots whispered his name like a prayer before flying. German pilots requested transfers to avoid his sector. But on that September morning, with the war winding down, with victory in sight, Georges Guynemer went up on what should have been a routine patrol, and he never came back down. No wreckage found, no body recovered, no debris field, nothing. For over 100 years, historians, researchers, and aviation experts have searched for answers. Where did he go? What happened in those final moments? Was he shot down by enemy fighters? Did his engine fail? Did he somehow survive and get captured? The truth is buried somewhere in the fog of war, and tonight we're going to piece together what really happened. Here's what makes this story different from every other wartime mystery. Guynemer left behind letters, flight logs, witness testimonies from pilots who were flying with him. We have declassified military records. We have first-hand accounts from men who saw him that morning. We have enough evidence to reconstruct the events, even if we can't answer the final question: where did his body go? This is the story of a young man at the absolute peak of his abilities, flying into history and simply disappearing. It's a mystery wrapped in the violence of war. It's about honor, sacrifice, and the terrible cost of being the best at what you do. Because here's the thing nobody talks about. Being the greatest fighter pilot in your nation doesn't protect you from death. Sometimes it makes you a bigger target. And on September 11th, 1917, that target was flying alone through enemy skies. So stay with me. We're going to follow Georges Guynemer from his childhood in Paris through his transformation into a legend, all the way to that final mysterious flight. And by the end, you'll understand why his disappearance remains one of aviation's greatest unsolved mysteries.
Let's start at the beginning. Paris, 1894. A boy is born into a wealthy family. His name is Georges-Marie Ludovic Jules Guynemer. His father is a successful businessman. His mother comes from old French nobility. This isn't a story about a poor kid who claws his way up from nothing. This is different. Georges had advantages: education, money, connections. But what he didn't have was health. The boy was frail, sickly. Doctors warned his parents that young Georges would never be a soldier. He suffered from a persistent lung condition, respiratory weakness. They told him his body couldn't handle the stress of military service. But here's the thing about being told you're too weak. Sometimes it makes you determined to prove everyone wrong. In 1912, when Georges turned 18, he did something unexpected. He enlisted in the French army. Specifically, he joined the Aviation Corps, the brand new flying service. This was only 8 years after the Wright brothers' first flight. Aviation was an infant technology. It was dangerous, unproven, revolutionary. The doctors were horrified. How could a boy with his condition survive the altitude, the cold air, the physical stress? But Guynemer was persuasive. He had family connections, and he had something more powerful than money or connections. He had absolute conviction that he belonged in the sky. His first years in aviation weren't glamorous. He started as an observer, the same role James McCudden had in the previous story, riding along in fragile planes, watching the ground, reporting what he saw. No control, no combat, just observation. But Guynemer had something special. He understood machines instinctively. Where other pilots needed to be taught how to control an aircraft, Guynemer felt it. According to his flight instructor's notes, preserved in the French War Museum, Guynemer had a gift for reading the air itself. He could sense wind shifts. He knew how to coax maximum performance from an underpowered engine. By 1915, at 21 years old, Guynemer was assigned to Squadron MS-3. This is when everything changed. He was flying the Morane-Saulnier Type N, a fragile monoplane with a single machine gun, not the sleek, powerful fighters we think of, just a wooden frame covered in canvas, an engine that barely produced enough horsepower to keep it airborne, and a single gun mounted on top of the fuselage. With this primitive machine, Guynemer began his hunting. His first confirmed victory came on July 1, 1915, a German two-seater reconnaissance plane. 1 month later, he shot down another, then another. By 1916, he was the top French ace. Here's where the legend begins to form. French newspapers started writing about the young aristocrat who defied his doctors. The boy, too frail to be a soldier, was shooting down enemy aircraft at a rate that shocked observers. The French public needed heroes. They needed proof that their nation could still produce greatness, and Georges Guynemer was exactly that hero. He became known as the Knight of the Air. The name came from his chivalry in combat. According to testimony from captured German pilots documented in French military archives, Guynemer often allowed enemy pilots to escape if their aircraft were disabled and they were no threat. He wouldn't shoot a man descending by parachute. He wouldn't attack crippled aircraft that were retreating. But when combat began, he was a different person entirely. Calculating, precise, relentless. By 1917, Guynemer became a national symbol. He flew the SPAD VII, a revolutionary fighter with Hispano-Suiza engine that gave him speed and climbing ability no enemy aircraft could match. He'd figured out a technique that other pilots had noticed but never perfected, attacking from above and behind, using superior altitude and speed to overwhelm the enemy before they knew what was happening. It was a tactic that would define aerial combat for the next 30 decades. A letter Guynemer wrote home in August 1917, held in private archives and quoted in the biography The Eagle of Lille by Henry Bordeaux, reveals something interesting. He knew his luck couldn't last forever. He wrote, "Every man who flies above the clouds knows he is flying towards his own death. The only question is when. For me, I hope it is not today." Those words, written just 2 weeks before his final flight, would haunt historians for generations. By September 1917, the war was entering its final phase. Germany was crumbling, their allies were surrendering, Austria-Hungary was fracturing, resources were depleted. The Central Powers had maybe 1 year, maybe less, before total collapse. For French pilots like Guynemer, this meant something specific. The hunting was easier, more targets, less organized opposition, but also more dangerous. Desperate pilots are unpredictable pilots. On September 10, 1917, Guynemer had been assigned to patrol the northern sector, an area near Poelcapelle, Belgium. According to his squadron commander's log, archived in the Service Historique de la Défense, French Defense Historical Service, the mission was straightforward: fly a morning patrol, look for enemy reconnaissance aircraft, engage if possible. Nothing unusual, nothing particularly dangerous. Guynemer prepared for the flight as he always did, methodically, carefully. He checked his SPAD VII, the aircraft he'd flown for months now, the machine he understood perfectly. He tested the guns, he verified the fuel tanks, he climbed into the cockpit at approximately 8:15 a.m. The weather that morning was poor, overcast, visibility limited to maybe 2,000 feet, the kind of conditions that make flying treacherous. Clouds could hide an enemy. Bad visibility could mean you're jumped before you see them coming. According to his wingmen, pilots who took off with him that morning, Guynemer seemed normal, calm, no premonition, no hesitation, just the routine of a professional going to work. At 8:35 a.m., 3 French SPAD VIIs climbed into the clouds above the front lines. Guynemer was leading. His wingmen were Captain Bozan Verduras and Lieutenant Dorme, both experienced pilots, both trusted by Guynemer himself.
They climbed through the overcast, 7,000 feet, 8,000 feet. The earth below disappeared into gray mist. Visibility was terrible. They were flying in and out of clouds, trying to catch glimpses of the ground between cloud layers. And then, something happened. According to Boson Verduraz's testimony, recorded immediately after the flight and preserved in French military archives, Guynemer signaled them to investigate something below. A German reconnaissance aircraft, possibly. Maybe an artillery observation plane. A target. Guynemer pushed his SPAD into a dive. His wingmen followed, trying to keep visual contact through the clouds. Down they went, 5,000 feet, 4,000 feet, the ground becoming visible below. And then, Guynemer disappeared. Not slowly, not gradually. One instant he was there, visible below Boson Verduraz through a cloud break. The next instant he was gone, simply vanished into the mist. Boson Verduraz and Dorm looked for him. They circled, they descended further, they searched the skies below the clouds. Nothing. No signal, no visual, no sign of what happened. And that was the last time anyone saw Georges Guynemer alive. When Boson Verduraz and Dorm returned to their aerodrome, they reported what had happened. Guynemer had simply disappeared during a patrol. The wheels began turning immediately. A search was launched. French aircraft scoured the area. They looked for wreckage. They looked for smoke. They looked for any sign of a crashed fighter. They found nothing. German reports from that day, captured after the war and analyzed by the French, offered no clarity. The German air service had no record of shooting down any French aircraft that morning. No pilot reported a confirmed kill. No wreckage had been found on German-held territory. This was the beginning of the mystery that would last over a century. The questions multiplied. Had Guynemer been shot down? If so, by whom? Where was his aircraft? Where was his body? Or, and this was whispered but never officially suggested, could he have somehow survived? Could he have crash-landed and been captured? Could he have survived the war in a German POW camp? These questions would consume historians for generations. Over the next 100 years, researchers proposed various explanations. Theory 1, Guynemer was shot down by German fighter pilots. Specifically, some historians claimed he was killed by Kurt Wolff or other highly skilled German aces, but German records provided no confirmation. Theory 2, his engine failed. The SPAD VII's Hispano-Suiza engine was powerful, but prone to failures at high altitude. Could Guynemer have suffered an engine failure and crashed? Possible, but wreckage should have been found. Theory 3, he was downed by flak, anti-aircraft fire from the ground, the most likely scenario according to some aviation historians. His aircraft damaged, his engine smoking, he attempting to nurse his crippled fighter back to friendly territory but failing. But again, where was the wreckage? Where was the body? The most haunting possibility came in the 1960s when researchers examining the area decades after the war found something. A SPAD aircraft engine component, found in a field near Pole Capelle, corroded by time, barely identifiable. Could it have been Guynemer's? Historians studied it. Tests were inconclusive. It matched the specifications of a SPAD VII, but it could have belonged to any number of aircraft lost in that sector.
The French military didn't give up. When Guynemer failed to return, the search intensified. Officers were dispatched to the region around Pole Capelle. They interviewed Belgian civilians, they searched fields, they looked for any sign of an aircraft crash. They found nothing. Within days, the reality became clear. Georges Guynemer was gone. His body had not been recovered. His aircraft had not been found. He had simply vanished into the clouds. The French government made an official statement. They declared Guynemer a mort pour la France, died for France, a national hero lost in service. But the mystery remained unsolved. According to modern aviation historians, and this is based on extensive analysis of German records, French documentation, and witness testimony, the most probable explanation is this: Guynemer was hit by enemy fire. either from an enemy fighter or from flak. The damage was catastrophic enough that he couldn't maintain flight. His aircraft went down. But here's the crucial detail. He went down in a region between the French and German lines, a no-man's land, churned by artillery, cratered, dangerous, a place where his wreckage could have been buried, where his body could have been lost in mud and rubble. By the time the war ended in November 1918, just 2 months after his disappearance, that entire region had been blasted so thoroughly that any evidence would have been obliterated. His final resting place became unknown. In 1920, the French government erected a monument to Guynemer in his hometown. No grave, no body, just a monument to absence, a memorial to a man who gave everything and who couldn't even be properly buried.
Here's what we know for certain about Georges Guynemer. He was 22 years old when he disappeared. He had shot down 53 confirmed enemy aircraft. He had earned France's highest military honors. He had become a symbol of French excellence in an age of mechanized warfare. And then, he was gone. No dramatic final battle, no heroic last stand, no body to bury. Just absence. When the war ended 2 months later, France was left with an unsolved mystery. Their greatest ace had vanished without explanation. It haunted the national consciousness. In the decades after, researchers tried to solve the mystery. In 1988, a theory emerged. A German historian claimed that Guynemer had been shot down by German Lieutenant Wolf, one of the most skilled German aces of the war. But Wolf's own records didn't confirm this, and Wolf himself was killed weeks later, so he couldn't verify the claim. The mystery remained a mystery. But here's what Guynemer's disappearance taught the world. At the highest levels of human achievement, death doesn't care about your accomplishments. Guynemer wasn't killed because he was careless. He wasn't killed because he made a mistake. He was killed because war is chaos, and even the best pilots can fall to forces beyond their control. His 53 victories remain one of the highest tallies of the First World War. He pioneered techniques that would define aerial combat for decades. He showed that a boy too frail to be a soldier could become one of history's greatest warriors. But his ultimate legacy is perhaps his absence, the question that remains unanswered. Where did he go? What happened in those final seconds before his aircraft touched the earth? We may never know, but we do know this. Georges Guynemer was the greatest fighter pilot France ever produced, and he died exactly as he feared. Suddenly, without warning, with his death becoming another mystery of the war. Here's what we know for certain about Georges Guynemer. He was 22 years old when he disappeared. He had shot down 53 confirmed enemy aircraft. He had earned France's highest military honors. He had become a symbol of French excellence in an age of mechanized warfare. And then, he was gone. No dramatic final battle, no heroic last stand, no body to bury. Just absence. When the war ended 2 months later, France was left with an unsolved mystery. Their greatest ace had vanished without explanation. It haunted the national consciousness. In the decades after, researchers tried to solve the mystery. In 1988, a theory emerged. A German historian claimed that Guynemer had been shot down by German Lieutenant Wolf, one of the most skilled German aces of the war. But Wolf's own records didn't confirm this, and Wolf himself was killed weeks later, so he couldn't verify the claim. The mystery remained a mystery. But here's what Guynemer's disappearance taught the world. At the highest levels of human achievement, death doesn't care about your accomplishments. Guynemer wasn't killed because he was careless. He wasn't killed because he made a mistake. He was killed because war is chaos, and even the best pilots can fall to forces beyond their control. His 53 victories remain one of the highest tallies of the First World War. He pioneered techniques that would define aerial combat for decades. He showed that a boy too frail to be a soldier could become one of history's greatest warriors. But his ultimate legacy is perhaps his absence, the question that remains unanswered. Where did he go? What happened in those final seconds before his aircraft touched the earth? We may never know, but we do know this. Georges Guynemer was the greatest fighter pilot France ever produced, and he died exactly as he feared. Suddenly, without warning, with his death becoming another mystery of the war.